Hi, I'm Gavin, and welcome back to the Sound Project. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the metric, the decibel. There's a lot of different applications in sound, obviously, for the decibel. It's a metric that represents sound intensity level and how loud or how soft a sound is. And it was named after, in honor of Alexander Graham Bell. The last L in Bell was dropped, and you just get decibel. And he did, obviously, a lot of work with audio, and the decibel is something that we use every single day, and we experience every day. And so there is this equation here, if you're looking at the sound pressure level and how that gets derived. So dB SPL is the sound pressure level in decibels, and that's shortened dB anytime you're looking at decibels. And then P in this equation is the measured pressure. And then the P naught here is going to be the standard reference pressure. Typically, that's going to be 20 micropascals. And so you take 20, the log of that ratio, and that's how you get your dB level. And the way that we hear, why is the decibel scale logarithmic? And the reason is that the way humans hear, we have a large range of hearing different pressures, and so we perceive loudness logarithmically and not linearly. And so that is why the dB is on a logarithmic scale. And it's also difficult to account for a huge range like that using a linear scale, because then we would be talking about going to concerts and it'd be in the dB level be in the millions if it was on a linear scale rather than just maybe 130. And so it's easier to keep track of those numbers by making it logarithmic. And logarithms allow for sound intensity to be converted or conveniently represented by smaller numbers. And so that's really what we're looking at here. And I want to show you a chart of different decibel levels and what their example is and what the perception is. And so at the bottom of this chart, we have a decibel level of 0, which is typically the normal threshold of human hearing. And the perception on this chart shows it as anechoic. I'm not sure if anyone's ever been in an anechoic chamber before, but these are rooms where it's 100% absorption on all surfaces, the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. You usually walk out on a metal grate and there's absorption below you. And it's typically very, very quiet environments to where if you're in there for long enough, you start to hear your own heartbeat. You start to hear a waterfall sound, which is the blood rushing across your eardrums. And so at 0 is that normal threshold of human hearing, and that would be decibel level of 0. Then as you move up this chart, and I'll just point out a few of these, like at 30 decibels is an average home with no stereo or TV on. And so just HVAC noise and just typical noise in a home is going to be around 30. At 50 decibels, that's considered moderate, and that's a conversation from 3 feet away, just people talking at normal levels. Go up to 70, that's inside a car at 35 miles an hour. That's something that we're all kind of used to, so you can kind of get an idea of what 70 decibels might sound like. You go up to 100 decibels, let's say it's a car horn from 10 feet away. It's important to know that the further away you are from a sound, the quieter it's going to be, and so that's why these examples have a lot of times a reference of how far away from that sound source that you are. But 100 decibels be a car horn from about 10 feet away. A rock concert is about 120. Now, obviously, it depends on who's mixing and what kind of music you're listening to, but usually somewhere in that 110, 120 range is going to be a rock concert. This chart happens to say that that's intolerable. Obviously, we all tolerate that, but it is good to know that when you're getting up into these higher levels, it's important to wear hearing protection whenever possible. And that's why when I'm at concerts, I always wear hearing protection, and I have decibel filters built into my earplugs that just drop everything 15 decibels. So all frequencies are evenly dropped 15 decibels. It's just like turning the volume knob down. And it's good because if you're at a concert and it's at 120 decibels, suddenly it's at 105 for you, and you can experience less distortion and less ear fatigue and potentially hearing damage over time. You go on up to this chart, at the very top of it is 140 decibels, and that's considered actually painful. There is a point where sound can get so loud that it's no longer just annoying and harsh. It causes you physical pain. So that would be a jet engine from about 10 feet away. It's a pro tip, try to stay at least 11 feet away from a jet engine. Try to get as far away as possible from a jet engine. But if you're at 140, it's going to cause you physical pain and cause hearing damage very, very quickly. So when we're talking about decibels and the change in decibels, I want to show this chart that if you increase or decrease the decibel level by 1, that's typically imperceptible, or very, very few people can tell how much of a difference that is. It's a very slight difference in just increasing 1 decibel here or there. If you increase it by 3 decibels, that's barely perceptible. People can tell what's going on there, that you've increased the sound. But if you get to 6 decibel increasing, then that's going to be clearly noticeable, and people are going to really key in on that. Now, once you get to an increase of 10 decibels, that's going to be perceived by someone as being about twice as loud as it was before. And then 20 would be 4 times as loud. And so there's that logarithmic scenario here going on again. But if you increase something by 20 decibels, it'll feel like it's 4 times as loud as it was before. So when you're looking at, now we're just looking at reduction here, decibel reduction. A lot of times we're working with clients that they want to reduce noise in their space. And so a reduction of 3 dB, actual SPL reduction is 50%, but your perception is only about 18% reduction. If you look at upwards of 12 dB of reduction, that's going to be perceived as 56% reduced. And so it's kind of a helpful chart if you're looking at reducing the amount of noise in your space. Sometimes people say, like, what if I could get 30% improvement? Well, you're probably looking at trying to reduce things by about 6 decibels. And that can be done with sometimes acoustical treatment, or it can be done by just turning the system down. And if you want to have certain targets and certain end results, then this is a good chart to look at. When you're adding sound sources, because obviously a lot of times you have 2 separate speakers or line arrays or different things like that. But if you're adding 2 different sound systems and they each have a different decibel rating, this is an equation that to kind of show you how that can be done. So if you have a dB difference between 2 sound sources of 0 or 1, what you do is you just add 3 decibels to the highest value. So if, for an example, if one source is at 33 decibels, the next one's at 33 decibels, the end result would be 36 decibels. If the difference between the 2 sound sources are 2 or 3 decibels, then you only add 2 to the higher value. So for instance, if it's 33 and 36, then you add 2 to that higher value, and that would be 38. For 4 to 8 decibel difference, you just add 1 to the higher value. So 33 decibels plus 41 decibels of 2 sound sources, going to end up with a 42 decibel end result when you sum them together. And then if it's 9 or more difference with the dB difference, it just is driven by that higher sound source. So if it's 33 decibels plus 50 decibels, the end result when they sum them together is just 50 decibels. So it's kind of a useful chart if you have multiple sound sources and you're wanting to add those decibel levels together. So in summary, the Decibel is a very useful tool. Obviously, we use it in sound all the time. It's good to have a general understanding of the decibel level for both studio and live applications. A lot of times live sound engineers, they're going to have different preferences for how loud they want to mix a show, or for recording engineers and producers. Some people like to mix at 80 decibels. Other people like to mix at 105. It just depends on your subjective nature and how you like to work. And it's logarithmic, so to cover a large range with smaller numbers, that's why that is set up in that way. So having a good grasp of dB levels helps you make better mixing decisions and live sound applications. And so it's good to know kind of where you sit, and it's always good to have metering as well, like have a dB meter to be able to measure how loud you are mixing, because not only for the audience's enjoyment, but also for your own hearing conservation. All right, that's been another episode of the Sound Project. Thanks for being a part of it. I'm curious if you know what the loudest sound source you've ever been exposed to. Please comment that below, and we'll see you next week.